and we're going to be recording. So hello, Vu. Hello, Rebecca. How are you?
Great to see you. Hi.
Hi. Thank you both for being here today. Like I said, we're live on Facebook right now, but I am recording. So if you are watching this later on YouTube, sorry that we're not live with you, but you're here for a great conversation. So stay with us. It's going to be wonderful. So just real quick, I'm going to give Facebook a minute or two just to let people know that we're here and that we're live. So Rebecca, where are you calling in from today?
I'm calling in from Echo Park in Los Angeles, okay, where I think we're having like the hottest February on records.
I know, it's so hot. I went for a walk today and it was like, this can't be February. It's just like, I'm down in San Diego, but where are you calling in from?
Well, it's nice to hear how nice and hot it is for you. I'm calling in from Chicago, snowy Chicago, but it did rain today, so it's
that's
nice and melting.
Nice and melting and slushy. Good.
Yes.
Yeah, love that. Yeah. No, my daughter lives in Chicago, so we keep track of the Chicago weather too. So we don't send her too many pictures of what it looks like outside here.
Yeah. Limit all the joy and warmth.
Yeah, try to keep it to a minimum until spring hits out there.
Sure,
yeah. Anyways, thank you both for being here. Just real quick, a little bit about Warwick's for those of you that might not be familiar with who we are. My little sign there says 1896. We celebrated our 125th anniversary last year. We've been in San Diego since the 30s. So we are located in a little town called La Jolla up in just a little bit north of the downtown proper San Diego. And one of the things that we've done for years and years is bring wonderful authors to the area. So we wish, Rebecca, that you were here with us in person, but we'll take you virtually. We love the virtual, what the virtual events have been allowing us to do. Like having Vu come in from Chicago with us. So that one might have been a hard match to try to put together. So for tonight, Vu and Rebecca are going to chat for about 35 minutes. In the comment section of Facebook, I'm going to put in how to order Rebecca's book. So if you're in the San Diego area, we would love for you to stop by and pick that book up and look for other books too. But we also, I know that everybody's used to this now, but independent bookstores do ship books, so we can ship this book to you too. So go ahead and click that link and you're going to want this book. And after this conversation, no doubt you will want it even more. I was telling Rebecca in the green room, our rep Gabe talked to us about this, and we can't stop talking about the book now. And so we can't wait to share this with everybody.
Thank you,
also
Gabe.
In that comment section. Yeah. Thanks, Gabe, if you're watching. Also in that comment section, go ahead and put your questions in there for Rebecca. It's going to be a great conversation, but we also love the audience questions. So don't be shy and put those in as well. So I think I've chattered enough. I'm going to introduce these two wonderful people and then go away for a little bit. So Rebecca Sachs is a graduate of the programs in writing at the University of California, Irvine. She is the recipient of several awards for her writing and also a number of fellowships. After graduating from Dartmouth, she worked for several years at Vanity Fair before moving to Tel Aviv to pursue a Master's of Arts in Jewish Studies. She has written dispatches from Tel Aviv and Jerusalem for publications including the Paris Review Daily. The City of a Thousand Gates is her first novel. We can't wait for you to talk about it. Joining her is Vu Tran. Vu was born in Saigon, Vietnam, and raised in Oklahoma. He is the winner of a Whiting Award, and his short stories have appeared in many publications, including the O. Henry Prize for Prize Stories, sorry about that, and the Best American Mystery Stories. He teaches creative writing, as he said, in Chicago at the University of Chicago. With that, you two have a wonderful conversation. See you in about a half hour or so.
Thanks, Julie.
Thank you, Julie. Hi, Rebecca.
Hey.
It's so good to see you. You look beautiful tonight. Thank you to
So
Julie.
do you.
Oh, thank you. I just want to say thank you again to Warwick's for inviting me to do this. This is really a sweet, and it's an honor for me to do this. And it's not only because you're my former student, so I can now take credit for all your talent and success, but you're also now a good friend, and you're also, you've become a writer who's surpassed all the crazy potential I remember from years ago. And I mean, your sentences are familiar, but there's the boldness and sharpness and ambition in your voice is something I really see now, and it's so impressive to me. So It's an honor for me in that way. But maybe first, before we start chatting to our heart's desire, maybe you can read something for us.
Yes, I'd love that. Well, just to say, it's very special for me to be here with you. And yeah, I'll be reading a short section about a little over a page that comes later in the novel from the point of view of Vera. She's like 20 something, aspiring journalist, came to Tel Aviv from Germany. And she's been sleeping with an Israeli named Amir, who is not very kind to her. All right. Amir has found a way to reach Vera, and it's oddly quaint. Email from Amir Oved, waiting in her inbox next to rejected pitches about refugee camps and e-invitations to weddings. She filed her story this morning, a few hours late, yes, but not too late. No word from her editor yet. But here is an email from Amir, an actual email. Turns out he uses a Yahoo account. The message, come over. She knows she shouldn't, but she writes back. I'm in Tel Aviv. Amir lives in Jerusalem. I'm in Tel Aviv. Refresh, new message. So I'll come to you. Vera responds immediately. No, send. Then, leave me alone. She waits. She missed this. The terror of waiting. She missed this. Fuck. She missed this. His response. I don't think that's what you want. Her body betrays her. When he talks to her like this, she becomes some tropical flower unfurling. She can feel the heat and warmth in her blooming, her clit swelling. Why is it this she likes best? The moments when he overpowers her. Do I, wonders Vera, seek after the violation of my own boundaries? And does that mean, the logic continues, that I hate myself? She writes to Amir, so then what do I want? She can't even wait for an answer. She's too hot, too turned on. She rolls over onto her stomach to touch herself this way, likes how her face mashes into the pillow. He's here, she tells herself. He's here and he's too big for the room. He's filling the doorway. He's on top of her. With her free hand, she slips 2 fingers into her mouth, lets herself imagine they are his. It's something he used to do, and she remembers that he was actually fairly gentle in the way he pressed his fingers into her mouth. Part of her always wished he would go too far, gag his fingers down her throat, down, his hand disappearing into her, his arm, until he himself slid completely inside her. Come inside me and replace me. It's late and she's hot under the covers. Her roommate isn't home, but even as Vera gets close, she doesn't let herself cry out. It's an old habit, dating back to her first furious rubbings as a child. So young, she couldn't name what she was doing, only knew it was forbidden to her. Her own body, forbidden to her. Amir understood this without needing it explained. An idiot, yes, but someone who understood by instinct how Vera fought against her own pleasure. When she kicked, he held her legs down. When she tried to shove her orgasm back into whatever vessel it sprang from, that's when he gave her his fingers, as you would to a teething child. Alone in the dark, alone in her dark room, her horrible room, the muscles of Vera's stomach shudder. When she does come, it's a wounded sound, smothered by her pillow. Lying on her back, breath still heavy, she opens up her email again. Refresh. He hasn't responded.
That's such a wonderful passage. You know, you actually let's talk about this because, you know, you just published, I think 2 days ago, this great Lit Hub piece, right? Was it yesterday or 2 days ago? And it's a piece on writing sex. And I actually want to read one of the major tenets that you lay out for writing sex well, right? And you say that as a writer, when I find myself imagining a reader getting turned on by the sex I am writing, I stop myself. I close my eyes. I re-enter the scene from the point of view of the character. Forget the reader. Forget turning them on or off. Forget that Goodreads exists. Forget it all. So much of writing for me is putting myself aside and writing from the deepest possible inside I can access of a character. And I think you absolutely do that with Vera. Vera, I mean, I've told you this, Vera is my favorite character. I could read an entire novel just with Vera, just about Vera. But, you know, that quote I just read, what I get out of that is the significance of centering the character in a sex scene, you know, not just their physical desire, but particularly their emotional and psychological state and history. But the aspect of this quote that's even more interesting to me is the idea of accessing the deepest possible inside of a character. And so I'm curious, I mean, do you think, first of all, that sex and sexuality facilitates your access as a writer to a character's most intimate self? Or are there other better avenues? What are your thoughts on that? And especially in terms of that idea of one's most intimate self?
Yeah, wow. It's funny, I remember taking your workshop as a divinity student, soon to drop out, although we did not know that yet. And I remember you talking about how the most consequential decision we make is the point of view we're writing from. And I didn't believe you. I was like, that sounds fake. I mean, it's probably something else. It's probably what happens or something. But I came to understand that, devote myself almost to that idea, I think. And in terms of sex and its relation to accessing that deep inside, which I think is to say, writing fully through the lens of a character, making their point of view your lens, completely. In some ways, I think sex can be quite helpful because it's often a literalization of something more abstract. Maybe some dynamic that is playing out in more discrete ways in a relationship might announce itself literally in sex. Who's more generous, who's resentful, what assumptions are being made about the needs or desires of the other, and when are those assumptions wrong, and how are conflicts solved, and what kind of hurt feelings are nursed. I think that a lot of times it becomes a little more legible and literal in sex because it's such a physical expression of emotion. So it can be, I think, a really good way to learn about more nuanced elements of a relationship that are worth exploring also outside of sex, but maybe identifying them for the first time in a sexual dynamic.
Yeah, I mean, because it's also the way we express ourselves sexually. I mean, our insecurities come out, so they express themselves without us, intending to.
Yeah, I mean, I myself have never had sex, but yeah.
But do you think, I mean, I remember, I wish I could remember who said this, because I say it all the time in class. It was a screenwriter, I think, for The Sopranos, who said that he thinks of characters in terms of, on that level of the head, how smart are they? What do they know? What do they don't know? Level of the heart, who they love, who do they hate? Who do they yearn for, et cetera. And always he says he thinks of them on the level of the loins, which is who do they want to have sex with? Who do they not want to have sex with? And it's not that they necessarily that you have to write about their sex life or their sexuality, but knowing that can help you access them. And I wonder if that's what he means, that intimate self that you're accessing through just, thinking about their sexuality. I mean, do you ever think of this aspect of the character, even though you're not going to write about this aspect?
First of all, I don't know who said that, but I'm interested in those divisions. I wonder how distinct that person imagines those division as. You know what I mean? I've definitely wanted to have sex with a poem. So I don't know, but yeah, no, that's a good. I mean, I think when I'm a little like stuck trying to make a character feel really present to me, yeah, like asking, maybe even just generally about like desire can be helpful. The same way asking myself about fear can be really helpful. Like, what are they afraid will happen? Not necessarily in sex.
Yeah,
It's just like it's an avenue to be like,
sure.
what kind of thoughts occupy this person's, mind, and like, and so, but I can't think of a time where it's like some kind of thought. I don't want to say thought exercise, but like I can't think of a time where I'm trying to think if this is true, where I like imagined about someone's desires
Hmm.
to understand them as a character, but then didn't write about them. But that could just be because like it's like fun, So once you start
Yeah.
thinking about it, you're like, might as well let's
You might as well, why am I not writing it?
yeah, let's just see what happens.
Uh,
But yeah, like it's I mean, but I will say, and I say this to students too when I teaching on writing, that like I do generate like a ton of material, like, and I really feel like there's no wasted writing, because there's so much I write about a character that never makes it into like a real draft,
sure,
but
yeah.
just to be with them more and feel more, and maybe even just get access to a memory that will be like gestured to in a single sentence, but like you actually write out the whole incident with like the tadpole or whatever, you know what I mean? Like,
Oh, sure.
so so that for sure, like I just think in general, like spending time together. I mean, I don't know, I guess I'm learning about love languages.
Yeah.
I guess maybe quality time with your characters is pretty
This is so
cool.
weird because I have my own tadpole memory as a child. That's so
Tell
weird
us the
that
tadpole
you.
memory.
Oh, I
That should be
can,
after
but I
party.
have so many questions for. I still have a lot of questions for you about the book, but like I want to kind of connect this to a conversation that we had when you were here, a few months ago in the fall,
Mhm.
for a reading, and you were describing the work. I forget of who the writer was, but you were describing a certain writer you loved and referred to their aesthetic as one of obsessive intimacies. And that kind of blew my mind because it was such a perfect way to describe the fiction that I tend to love, the work of Duras or Mary Gateskill or Michael Ondaatje, writers like that, and the films I love as well. But it's also the kind of writing I aspire to. And uh, you remember our conversation about that?
I do, yeah. I think I was talking about I fear I'll mispronounce her name, but Magda Szabo, the Hungarian writer who wrote
That's
The
right.
Door.
That's
By the
right.
way, that book is
I still need to
everyone's
read it. You recommended it to me. But do
yeah.
you feel, I mean, would you say the same of yourself as a reader and a writer? I mean, how would you explain your notion of obsessive intimacies? It can mean so many different things, I think.
Yeah, it can mean so many different things. Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I feel like you and I have had a conversation about obsession and love that has gone
Yeah.
on for like almost like it must be we're closing in on a decade now,
Yeah,
I
yeah,
can think I remember like wandering the hills of the Breadloaf Writers Conference, and we're
that's right.
talking about these things. So I do feel like in a way we kind of, you and I share certain understanding, which has something to do with like how total loving is, and maybe even how sometimes in loving, I'll just speak for myself, like I'm not
Yeah,
speaking for you, but what I feel like I've been trying, what I think about maybe when I'm as a reader and a writer, and maybe to some extent as a lover, like how there's always this impulse towards some kind of self-annihilation into love. And
yeah,
that so and it doesn't have to be romantic love, like relationships with families. I'm especially obsessed with like the like mothers and daughters, um but just that like there is a part of it, you can feel so often that impulse towards um like a total breakdown of all boundaries between like you and the love object, let's say.
Yeah.
And I think that that can lead to a kind of obsessive way of like loving and understanding love, because in a way you are struggling to maintain your sense of self while also seeking to annihilate yourself
Mhm.
into love. And like then love and a relationship kind of becomes a way to, in some ways, like almost begin to like face yourself and face what it is you are fleeing from into another person, you know? And I think that that concept, which I have not perhaps articulated before, because no one asked me until you, but like maybe underpins a lot of how I write relationships.
Mhm. I can see it. I can see it in the book. Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't mean to cut you off. You were.
No.
I mean, because,
Yeah.
I mean, that makes complete sense to me. Everything you just said there made complete sense to me. I mean, I mean, on my end, I think and if you don't mind me sharing, kind of how I think about it, because I think it relates to your book and to a character like Vera. You know, for me, intimacy is that situation where we're at our most vulnerable, right? So being this vulnerable, we can't help being our most honest about others, but especially about ourselves. And that's both a deeply comforting, it's a deeply comforting and rewarding space, right? Whether you're alone or with someone else, but it's also a deeply unsettling and confusing space, because it can involve the more frightening and irresolvable aspects of oneself. But whether you feel like you deserve this goodness or badness in this space, there's always the element of unadulterated truth there. And it's unavoidably honest because of that. And that's why the notion of obsessive intimacy is so compelling to me, because it suggests that someone is obsessed with the deepest kinds of truth, especially emotional truth. It's the kind of stuff that's pretty hard, not just the kind of truth that will set you free and bring clarity, but the kind of truth that you know is hard to confront. And someone who keeps diving headlong into that kind of confrontation is both brave and extremely reckless, right? And that's what's so compelling. And that's what's so compelling about Vera, and why she's my favorite character, because she's obsessed with this man who doesn't treat her well, does not love her. She's constantly, obsessed with this female reporter who's more successful than her. She's just constantly crashing up against her deepest insecurities and desires. And while it's self-destructive, there's also something incredibly moving about it, because it's so honest and truthful. It's like she's diving towards the most honest aspects of herself. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, yes. Well, it's exciting to hear how much of her came through, and also reminding me, it's funny when you said you could read a whole book from her point of view, the first thing I thought was like, that would literally kill me. She was exhausting to write.
Yeah,
it was like,
yeah.
Oh my gosh, it was like always having a blister that had just popped, that's what it felt like walking around with Vera. Oh my gosh. But there is something so, yes, I so reckless in the way she is throwing herself against the world. And I don't know, maybe like,
it's
pardon?
so revealing.
Yeah.
It's an exhaustion that comes with all these revelations. That's what's so unique about about that aspect of writing a character like that, but also reading it. That's what I respond to with Vera.
Yeah, I mean, yes. I think that in a way, maybe the impulses I have that are not unlike Vera's, I'm lucky that I found fiction to sort of channel them into. Fiction is a way that you can engage in that kind of obsessive intimacy without a boundary, where it actually is quite profitable, that you're able to enter the character fully and lose yourself a little, which is like my favorite pastime. You know, and I don't like drink or do drugs. So it's sort of like
I don't
fiction,
either. So
you know, herbal tea. But like, but so yeah, cheers. But but yeah, so I think in a way, like it's sort of like a fiction writing impulse.
mm,
But then also it's frightening because when you're that deeply inside someone else, learning things about them that maybe they don't even know. You know, there's lots of things about Vera she doesn't see, the staggering limitations of her own feminism, you know, for example, which uh her Islamophobia, like her
yeah.
you know, like there's a lot about she's like no, she can identify anyone's hypocrisy except her own. That's like, you know, that's like, so
Yeah.
I think what inhabiting a character like that also ended up, you know, would always put me ultimately in contact with maybe a part of myself I hadn't been aware of. Um and that can be scary, you know, because you don't know what you're going to find. I mean, when I started writing this, for the whole time I wrote this book, I thought of myself as like cis and straight. And, you know, by the time I was promoting it, I was like, oh, actually, by the way, you know, I'm a
Yeah.
non-binary lesbian and my pronouns are she, they. And it's like scary in a way to, am I going to have the courage to like face parts of myself that I was not in contact with and then let myself engage with them, you know, and not like immediately forget them. I mean, that's frightening. Writing, we're lucky to do it, but I mean, it is frightening.
Yeah, it can be incredibly frightening. I mean, it goes back to that phrase you're using about the self-annihilating aspect uh, of of sex, but of this kind of obsessive intimacy, you know. And it makes me wonder, at least, how much of that self that you're annihilating is this constructed self that you've, you know, learned to kind of negotiate the world with, and how much is it expose you to a deeper self, you know. For example, what you discovered about yourself in the process of writing this book, you know. um, I can't help but think about the novel in terms of how I can't help imagining how you kind of made your decisions, you know, whether at the beginning or throughout the novel, and how much it kind of progressed with your own development as a person, you know. I don't think about that specifically, but what I mean by this is that, you know, one of the more prominent aspects of the novel is the amount of characters whose point of view you go into. I think there are around 32 characters whose mind
Numbers vary, but yeah, it's in the 30s. We've established that.
but you know, many get their own chapters, and some characters get multiple chapters. But what I was wondering is that how did you have some kind of approach or principle in bringing each character to life, you know, no matter how much stage time they got, and did that ever overlap with your own, you know, kind of development as a person?
Mm.
You know, when I wrote my first novel, I changed so much during it. I guess this is why I'm asking you this question.
You changed in the process of writing it?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, well, let's see. I think when I was writing it, I was changing behind my own back. I was fully, I think things were happening to me that I didn't think about or understand because my sort of conscious mind was completely devoted to following the thread of this novel. And you know, it's true there are a lot of characters, which wasn't by design. I didn't sort of like sit down and make like a layout, like, okay, I'm going to have this family in East Jerusalem, and I'm going to have like this Palestinian family in Bethlehem, and they're going to somehow correspond to this Jewish family in West Jerusalem. And it's like some sort of score sheet where I was like balancing it out, you know.
Yeah.
What it was more like was sort of following like curiosity, or even like following, like, which to me I almost for some reason I imagine as like a red thread but you know, often I would write a chapter and there'd be some ancillary character who was just you know, didn't have an existence really outside of the way that whoever's point of view I was in was imagining them. Like, that's my contact with that outside character. That other character was limited to the imagination of the person whose point of view I was in. And because, you know, this is Jerusalem and the West Bank, and to some extent Tel Aviv, like, people's imaginations tend to be quite limited by the intensity of the political boundaries. So it was hard for characters to like imagine the lives of people who were sort of outside of their immediate, you know, sphere of concern, let's say. But my curiosity was so intensified by that, like, you know, realizing that every person, whoever's point of view I was in, let's say it's an American Jewish woman, Emily, who's married to an Israeli and has a kid, like, how is she interacting or failing to interact with Palestinians? And, you know, what's the reality that she's not seeing? And not even from like a political, I mean, that's a very political inquiry, you know, and probably reveals my politics. However, it's almost more from the standpoint of like character that was like sort of driving that, like who how would this narrative be organized if the center was not Emily? You know, if I approached this situation and I relocated the center somewhere else, how would this whole narrative change? And almost just like doing that successively, like I kept relocating the center and writing. A lot of times, you know, the events tend to overlap a lot. There's, you know, a horrible beating by a mob. There is a stabbing on a settlement. There's also things like soccer games, you know, and bad weather. Like, events are happening, and how they're being understood and narrated, really, like, to go back to what I learned, you know, very early on in your classes, like, is so informed almost entirely by whose point of view we're in, which is to say, I think, where is the center being understood of the narrative? And so kept wanting to relocate the center. You know, I could have called it City of a Thousand Centers.
Yeah.
Less of a ring, but
No, absolutely true. But I think it's also, I think what you're suggesting is something that I've also always believed, which is that obviously we move around the world, and there are certain people who just seem deeply boring to us and uninteresting. But I've always thought that if you spend an hour with someone and you can ask them anything you wanted, they could become interesting to you, because everyone's, you know, inner life is interesting, is complex in some way. And it seems to me that you bring that to your writing of this book, because even characters who only get a page or so of interiority, I find very human, and they come to life in that brief stage time. I imagine you never kind of approached it as, well, how do I make them distinct, right? That seems like, you know, a kind of thing that most, say, writing students would feel the need to do. Well, how do I make this character unique? That didn't seem to be your kind of approach or principle of your approach, right?
no, I think the interest was genuine, you know. It wasn't really about like, how will this read? How will this sound different to a reader? It was just really wanting, I mean, I people ask a lot about inspiration, as you probably know, when, you know, they ask fiction writers this, and I'm never sure how to answer, but I've realized, like, for me, a lot of what motivates the writing is like real curiosity and concern for other people, and wanting to know them deeply. And I think for me, one of the so even in like a short, let's say almost like vignette, you know, a few pages of an elderly man wandering a kibbutz avocado
Yeah.
orchard, for example, I relied a lot on memory. I think that how we narrate the world around us and how we narrate ourselves into it is almost like this collaboration between what's actually unfolding and what we are remembering and reenacting or reliving or rethinking, or, how has all we've lived informing the present moment that we're in. So I think my primary tool is going into a character's memory, which is probably why I generate so much writing that I don't use. Most of what I'm generating is memory. The smells of their grandmother's kitchen, or
Oh, absolutely.
waiting for the bus with their father. And I thought of one thing, just to go back, just because it feels relevant to something when I talked about like finding different centers, but then I want to go back to memory. But it feels weird not to say, like, one thing that's been hard for me, or let's say a little shocking, is like how so much reception of the book, in terms of like, especially reviews, all tend to always give like a Jewish Israeli center. Like, my book was quite widely reviewed, which was like unbelievably flattering. Like, you're just amazed anyone notices you. But, there are many Palestinian characters in this novel, and I did not see a single review in which a Palestinian writer was asked to review the book. And it was like painful for me in a way, or painful in the sense of maybe I'd failed somehow, that I was trying to destabilize in a way how narratives about the so-called conflict, so-called because conflict sounds like it's like two, proportionate sides, not with no disparity in power, which is not the case, but like that it felt like somehow the way, like in certain ways, it felt like the ways the book was received was reinforcing that kind of like one fixed center, where by the way, I am located as a white Israeli Jew, but so just to say, like, it's been hard. I don't want to say hard, like it's my struggle, but it's been, I've been disturbed by that, and wondered if I could have done more somehow, but just to go back to memory, to tie this together, a lot of my ability to write into the memories of characters, like Palestinian characters, had to do with, having meaningful friendships with people who live in Palestine and were willing to open their doors and lives and hearts to me, so like that wanting to reward their trust in me felt important.
Well, I feel like, that idea of curiosity seems to me the best and appropriate way, not just to, approach a world as kind of politically fraught as the world in this book, but any book, the world of any book. I mean, it seems to me often the missing ingredient from people's notion of empathy, which is this act of curiosity. There's oftentimes, I suspect that it's more a passive open-mindedness that people are really doing, when they try to empathize. And it seems
Passive
to me
open-mindedness, that's so good.
And it seems to me you're talking about like an active curiosity that is not selective, first of all.
Yeah.
And that is free from free even from moral judgment. I remember the event that I invited you to read at University of Chicago in November, and you did such a wonderful job. Your reading was great, and you handled the audience Q&A with such intelligence and poise and most of all compassion. But it was odd, because the first question was from this very smart and passionate Palestinian grad student who was upset at you being an Israeli Jewish writer, writing from the perspective of a Palestinian woman. And I don't want to misrepresent, his question or him, but he was clearly upset. and then after that, there was another question from this time from a Jewish undergraduate student who loved your novel and was curious whether you thought you were being sufficiently fighting enough against, anti-Semitism in the novel. And it seemed to me actually very similar questions that were approaching your novel from opposite vantage points. And I wonder since then if you've processed that moment and I mean, in some ways, I'm wondering if it actually has reinforced the decisions you made.
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me to Chicago. It was
Oh, absolutely.
such a joy. And I guess I should also say, like, I feel dishonest saying I'm Israeli, but then it feels dishonest to like not say that, like I didn't like grow up in Israel or anything like that. And I'm sure there's lots of, inaccuracies that I didn't understand in my depictions, although I do have Israeli citizenship. So just to like disclose that, I don't know.
Sure.
I always so worry about like incorrectly stating my positionality, but yeah, I mean, it was neither person had read the book, which I guess only matters to say like they were coming with a lot of their own like experiences and fears and concerns, like lived experiences and real ones. Maybe not like directly responding to anything that I had written. And I think that in both cases, I understood what they were asking and why they were asking it. That Palestinian grad student, whose name I wish I could remember, was really deeply concerned with like the ongoing erasure that he experiences and the possibility that I, as a writer, would be participating in that erasure. And what I, all I could really say to him was like, yeah, that concerns me too. And that's something I thought about a lot. And I tried to take on this novel with like the most integrity that I could, instead of asking myself, do I have a right to write this? And, making it a kind of almost like hypothetical debate, like it's the trolley problem or something. Just like ask, like, what would it take to do this with integrity and care and respect for all the characters? So, like, and then in the case of the young Jewish American student, I know. I mean, it can be frightening to be Jewish in America, and it's easy to maybe, let's say, reduce issues of like Israel and Palestine to issues of like anti-Semitism. And, like I personally work hard not to traffic in those simplifications, but they're not like coming from a place of malice. They're coming from a place of like being a human who's like afraid of something, and that fear is like real. And I try to like, hear and honor. So yeah, I think I felt like the difficulty of those interactions, or I don't say difficulty meaning the the tension and the concern and the pain that I sort of felt in the room, like reminded me like why I wanted to write this book. And also how important maybe at some point it is for me to just like let go, and let it be in the world and let people respond to it. And letting go doesn't mean not listening. Listen when people say like, hey, you really got this element of being like Mizrahi, like being like a Jew of color in Israel wrong, or I really feel like you didn't emphasize enough the bureaucracy of the occupation enough, so listening for sure, but no longer thinking of myself as someone who was maybe like a part in the discussion, apart from sort of listening and going on and writing the next book, honestly.
And to know that not only that you can't control people's response to your writing, but that you can control your response to their response, right? And to what you can learn from their response.
Definitely. And like, I think just for me understanding that like I did not have to write this novel perfectly to write it with integrity. And so if
Yeah,
people are going to tell me about ways that it wasn't perfect, like that's not this, I don't need to get defensive. That's not the same as them saying like, you shouldn't have written this. And even if they do say that, like, that's okay too. Like,
yeah.
I disagree. But I think like that lack of just taking that same curiosity and turning it towards yourself and your own work, you know, and being willing to sort of like learn and listen, like it keeps life interesting.
Absolutely.
I've been nodding my head back here this whole time, just like listening to this whole conversation. It's just
Aw.
been so thought-provoking and fantastic. We could have let this go on forever and ever. Yeah, I think I can't remember who we had, one of the politicians that came and said you need to take criticism seriously but not personally,
Oh, nice.
you know, where it's just like, yeah, you, because you can't, like you said, Vu, you can't, how people react to this is so personal. And you'll have, if you have 1,000 readers, you'll have 1,000 different responses to it. So, but thank you for your vulnerability in it. Okay, Ari has a question. So she says, Rebecca, I wonder if you've thought about the erotic relationship that's often encouraged to develop between Jews and the land of Israel, and if that influenced how you approached writing characters who have sex.
Whoa, informed decision. Wow, wow, wow. I mean, informed question.
Yeah,
Excuse me.
yeah.
Wow. All right. All right.
She's
So-
coming right at you.
All right. Well, let's see if I can answer their question. So it is, yeah, okay. I mean, yes, but not in the way. There are all these wonderful eroticized descriptions of like Israel and Jews, and some of them are imagined as like a kind of marriage, and which kind of mirrors the sort of marriage between, you know, us as Jews and Hashem, and it's all very beautiful and heady. I have to admit, I didn't think of that a lot. Maybe I tapped into it a little in the points of view of there's an Orthodox woman who has a very sort of actually like beautiful, loving marriage, and maybe a little, but I have to admit the biggest way that that played out for me was in the element of control. I think the way that women's bodies are obsessively controlled mirrors this obsessive desire to control the land, such that it almost becomes like the land itself is this sort of femme fatale that's causing us all to kill each other. So I think my take on it, yes, there is that erotic component there, but it's not, to be honest, that sort of like sensual headiness that I actually love as a sort of, as a Jew and as someone who thinks a lot about, you know, text and metaphor, but it had more of a kind of let's say political concern. Yeah, but I love that question.
It's a great question.
Great question.
Really good question. And Bill, I loved, and Rebecca, you repeated it too, passive open-mindedness. I think that applies to so much of what social media, I mean, it's like, I'm gonna steal those words from you because it absolutely is. Those are brilliant because it's,
Yeah, Vu, we're gonna quote you.
oh, a lot with that one, because it just applies to, oh my God, so much.
Yeah.
So Aylin has a question. Could you talk a bit about your next book? And is there any emotional thread, continuation of journey between your first and your next?
No. Next question. No, I'm just kidding.
That was good. I like that. I don't think any in all these I've done, nobody's ever just said no.
No, yeah, I work on a new novel, which in some ways is super different. I'm writing from first person, which I've never done in fiction before. So that's been like such an exciting challenge, and like it feels like the boundary between me and the narrator keeps slipping, and I'm excited by it, but I'm also, it's all new challenges, and I love that. And I do think that it's a great question, that in the sense of writing City of a Thousand Gates brought up a lot of questions for me about, I think, relationships to power and how we feel those relationships playing out in our intimate lives. And I think like, it just felt like the more I wrote about it, the more questions I had. And even once I'd finished writing City of a Thousand Gates, I think those questions lingered in different ways, and maybe also wanting to more directly interrogate that question for myself too. And I think that's something I'm playing with in the new work, in the form actually of a love story. I've always wanted to just write like a love story, you know? So, but it's frustrating how a lot of love stories seem to take place in some kind of vacuum, like, which yeah, you know, especially if the characters are white. So I think wanting to stay true to like the sort of like the concerns I have and the awareness of like what it means to be in the world, but also just like let people fall in love and see what happens. So that's the new.
Love it.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad you all talked about the Lit Hub article at the beginning of the conversation, because I made sure I put that in our tweet, because it's like, that was so great. It's fantastic.
Oh,
Yeah, it was a really good article. Okay. Max, I'm gonna probably mispronounce your name here, so sorry about that. Has a question. So when characters in the novel are struggling with possession, loss, and power in their interpersonal interactions, is it self-annihilation that they are resisting? And when you said, what are the characters scared of happening? What does a self-annihilation represent? Is it the loss of self, the discovery of self, or something else? What are they scared of?
whoa.
Want me to reread that one? That was a long one.
I think I think I hear them. I got it.
Okay.
Well, I will say that most characters that I've encountered in writing them have an idea about themselves. They have an idea about who they are. They have a story they tell themselves about themselves. And I think I'm quoting Vera here about her own parents, but whatever doesn't fit, they leave out, you know? And most of us, I think, go through the world that way. Like if I do something uncharacteristically cruel, I probably am not going to say to myself, oh gosh, like I must be like a really emotionally withholding person. I was so cruel. It's like, oh, I had a bad day, like, ugh, or like, oh, they were so needy. You know what I'm saying? Like I maintain the narrative that I have. And so I think that what I call self-annihilating could just be things that call that narrative into question. You know, like so often, I'm sure like looking at the most difficult parts of themselves would be a chance for a character to grow and change, you know, and reimagine themselves or hold themselves accountable in a new way, which, you know, I definitely try to do as a person. I try not to make my characters like too good, you know, like it's just boring. It's so boring.
You're so right.
You know, so but yeah, so I think this what we're holding on to so tightly and what we imagine will be self-annihilating is really maybe just a form of growth. And but I think protecting those ideas we have about ourselves in a relationship, or, you know, when it comes to like being, for example, like a liberal subject, you know, that we protect those ideas of ourselves so fiercely that it often expresses itself as a kind of anger. I do think that if we just let go and looked hard, that, you know, we might grow and change, not just as individuals, but as a society, perhaps. But yeah, so I think what we imagine as self-annihilating is actually just change.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. All right. This was a fantastic conversation. I'm so glad that we were able to do this and that you both had the time to spend with us. So Vu, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Vu.
Appreciate it so much. Are you working on anything, Vu, that we can talk about, or?
Yeah, I mean, I'm working on a new novel that it's my pandemic novel, though it has nothing to do with the pandemic.
Right. But just something that you were consumed with during this.
Yes, very much so. And very, very grateful to be.
That's true. something to take our mind off of that. Rebecca, so we'll look forward to that coming probably next year, I'm assuming, if you're working on it now.
That's another conversation.
Exactly. That's a whole publishing thing that we won't get into here. But thank
Such
you
a
for your
pleasure.
time.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Julie.
And Rebecca, thank you for your time. Appreciate it so much. I'm looking forward to more great things from you too. So thank you both.
Thank you.
Everybody have a great evening.
Good to see you, Rebecca.
Good night, Bye, Boo. Good night.